Okay, thank you everyone for coming. We are going to get started here. Kudos to you for sticking it out. Last day, last session. This is great. We're here for the panel on establishing standards for the global voluntary carbon market. My name is Amy Zell, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session. I am the technical director for voluntary carbon markets with IETA. If you're not familiar, IETA is the International Emissions Trading Association. We are a nonprofit industry association representing 300 plus members as the business voice in carbon markets, both compliance and voluntary globally. But what are we here to talk about today? Standards in the voluntary carbon market. So the voluntary carbon market, the VCM, if you will, we need another TLA, three-letter acronym. It's been expanding rapidly. Maybe a bit of a blip in 2022, but since 2017, it's been on the ups. So with that increase in scale, we're seeing increased interest, increased number of players, increased number of standards, and an increase in diversity of buyers into the market. This expansion has raised concerns and questions around credibility and quality and integrity. And there's this real need for transparency and standards and verification systems to give the assurance to buyers and market participants that the credits are real, that they represent true emission reductions, they're permanent, additional, verified, and they have that, we can trust what they represent. So there are a number of new initiatives that are working to sort of solve this question around credibility. Bit of an alphabet soup. We have the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, ICVCM, the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, VCMI. We also have the Carbon Credit Quality Initiative, which John will be able to speak to later, CCQI. And then we also have some legacy or long-standing programs that have been working to solve this question around credibility, such as ICROA. So quick pitch, since this is what I work on at IETA, ICROA is the International Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Accreditation. It's a voluntary initiative housed within IETA with the goal of recognizing high-quality, high-integrity intermediaries and service providers in the voluntary carbon market. A big component of that is making sure that they're transacting high-quality credits. Buzzword of the day, high-quality credits. So we have a standards endorsement procedure to recognize high-quality carbon crediting programs or standards in the VCM. So as the market grows, these initiatives must work together and establish sort of common definitions, common guidelines, and credible standards in order to support the market's growth and the role in the global mitigation of global emissions. So the structure of this panel, just like all the other panels, we're going to first hear from our three panelists, which I'll introduce in a moment. They're going to have about 5 minutes each to tell us what they're working on in this space related to establishing standards. I'm going to have some moderator questions, but I want to leave a lot of time for your questions from the audience, so I'll probably check in halfway through, see how many questions there are, and maybe do a bit of moderated questions, audience questions, because we want to make sure that this is an interactive discussion. So with that, we will jump in. Our first speaker is Jeff Swartz. He is the Vice President of Trading and Shipping at BP, and he also has a role on the ICVCM. So Jeff, without further ado, we'd love to hear your thoughts on establishing standards.
Thanks so much, Amy, and good afternoon, everyone. Well done for staying around to the very end. I'm usually the one who leaves conferences after lunch on the last day, so you all get extra credit, and I hope we end the day and the event with a bang rather than a whimper. So looking forward to this panel and hearing the questions that you all have. So I'm not the Vice President for Trading and Shipping, but I work at Trading and Shipping, and I'm the Vice President for Low Carbon Solutions in BP. So that's a business which is focused on carbon markets, both compliance and voluntary carbon markets, and then also our renewable natural gas business. We've been in the voluntary carbon market for 20 years. We've been one of the very first companies who was active in the space when the market was first getting set up. And we have really a good story to tell. We've experienced the ups and downs of the voluntary carbon market, as have many of you in the room. And I think given that experience and the size of our company, we feel it's imperative for BP to be leading the market when it comes to integrity. And what we're trying to aspire towards is having a portfolio of voluntary carbon credits that we can offer to our customers, many of which are in the hard-to-abate sectors of the economy, so steel, cement, fertilizers, transportation, other parts of the energy value chain, where companies don't have necessarily the technological solutions at hand for them to decarbonize as rapidly as the world needs us to decarbonize in order to deliver the Paris goals. So we're actively offering carbon credits in the voluntary carbon market to those customers, and we want to lead the market by offering credits which we believe are high integrity. So we're active in IETA, and we're active in other initiatives, and also active in helping to shape the future when it comes to the integrity of our market. Environmental integrity is absolutely key for us, but so is market integrity. I think when we look at the various alphabet soup that you mentioned just now, Amy, and really good job with all of that, there's still yet a missing piece of how we can improve our market when it comes to market integrity. And as a regulated company, we believe that this market needs to grow both when it comes to integrity and environmental performance, but also integrity of all actors in the value chain. So that's what we're talking about. That's what we're very serious about, and we're trying to lead the way. So we've been spending the last year really doing our own homework internally to define what integrity means to us at BP in the voluntary carbon market. And we have developed our own principles for environmental integrity and market integrity. And we've started to road test those with some of our customers, and we hope to be able to make some further announcements on that later this year. But at the same time, we're very serious about making sure that when we are trying to bring our customers with us, that we can also bring our suppliers with us as well. So we directly engage with project developers. We directly engage with the exchanges. We engage with a lot of folks at this conference. And what we want to make sure going forward is that our customers and our suppliers have the same principles as we do when it comes to environmental and market integrity. So that's a journey that we're on, but we're hoping to bring our customers with us. I think the only way that we're going to really grow this market in order for all of the private finance that we need to flow in order to deliver the Paris goals is if the market is rooted in integrity. And that's why I personally signed up to serve on the ICVCM. So I'm on the ICVCM board in a personal capacity. And that's been a real privilege over the past year. I'm really proud of the work of the ICVCM and my colleagues there. My role is an elected market representative. So I don't have a vote in the ICVCM's work. That's deliberate to manage any potential conflict of interest. But the work of the ICVCM is to service a single purpose, which is to make sure going forward in this market that we all have a single benchmark for environmental integrity. And I believe that's imperative if this market is going to grow, and if that market is going to grow at the way we need it to grow in order for it to deliver on the Paris goals. I think the ICVCM is really exciting in terms of the work that it's been doing. It's going to come out with some version, the first version of its core carbon principles and its assessment framework and assessment procedure next week. So stay tuned for that. I can't talk too much about it at this stage, but a lot of work's been done, and a lot of you have been shaping that work and been part of that consultation. And as a market representative, what I'm really pleased is that we're now going to have a special market advisory group. So we're going to involve the carbon market more in the ICVCM's work, in addition to the ICVCM having an expert panel. I think that's really important that all of us, not just BP, but everybody in the market is on the same journey when it comes to the work of the ICVCM. And the last thing I'll say with regards to integrity in the carbon market, I think we can go as far as we can as an industry. We can do everything we can with our own industry initiatives, but I think there is still a role for governments to come into this market and for for governments to have some role in the way that the market is performing going forward. So we're supportive of the announcements that the CFTC has been made. We're supportive of other regulators to examine the market and try and help grow the market as best as we can. I have to say, working in BP, when you try and do large transactions in an unregulated market, you face headwinds, as I'm sure many of you in this room know and can attest to. And so if there's a way that we can get some form of government support to help grow our market and that we're all operating in a safe and effective way, then I think that's going to be a great outcome. And it's something that I'm pretty passionate about. So happy to discuss more of that during the debate and the discussion. Thank you, Amy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeff. And even though you said you can't speak to the ICVCM, I suspect we'll get a question or two from the audience on it. Eagerly anticipated. And our next speaker is John Holler, next to me here. John is a Senior Program Officer of Climate Cooperation and Sustainable Fuels at WWF, the World Wildlife Fund. He also has roles on ICAO and with CCQI. So John, take it away.
Thanks, Amy. And I also want to thank the organizers for putting on a fantastic conference the last couple of days. Really great job. So in my role in the WWF U.S. office, I kind of split my time between carbon market governance work and our aviation work, which is mostly focused on sustainable fuels. And prior to WWF, where I've been for, I think, 4 years now, I was with Vera for 5 or 6 years. So have some good context working in the voluntary carbon market space. So what does WWF do on carbon markets? How do we engage in the VCM specifically? There's a number of different capacities. With respect to CORSIA, WWF is part of a coalition that has observer status under ICAO. And so I serve under the technical working groups under CORSIA for both the carbon crediting aspect of developing rules for that component on CORSIA, as well as the sustainable fuels aspect of eligible alternative aviation fuels that are eligible for crediting there. In addition to kind of that international compliance type context, WWF does a lot of work in advising companies on how to ramp down their emissions along a science-based emissions pathway, and that includes a lot of guidance about how to engage with the voluntary carbon market in that respect. What are the role of carbon credits? How should companies be using these tools as part of their decarbonization plan? And then lastly, and I think the most relevant for today's conversation, WWF is a founding member of the Carbon Credit Quality Initiative alongside the Environmental Defense Fund and OCO Institute. And CCQI is a collaboration that has produced transparent, publicly available, and free information on carbon credit quality, which is all available on the CCQI website. There are business cards on that table in that corner in the back of the room with a QR code that will bring you to the CCQI website. So please grab one on your way out if you're interested in visiting that. But the CCQI stems from, I think, what we have since demonstrated is a significant range between programs and methodologies and project types on quality and what quality means. CCQI was kind of originated around the time that programs started applying to CORSIA for eligibility, and I think there's a lot of well-founded concern about what programs would be greenlit and contribute carbon credits to this compliance scheme. And so we set up CCQI to try to bring some light and clarity into the very diverse carbon market space, which, largely speaking, doesn't have any kind of like high-level regulatory oversight or guidance beyond kind of just self-accountability and basing standards for the most part on ISO standards and that kind of thing. So what does CCQI do? In short, we produce scores of 1 through 5 for each of 7 different quality objectives that we think are relevant to the overall quality of carbon credits in the market. And these scores are determined based on an assessment methodology, which is publicly available. And we do not, unlike some other, I don't know necessarily what people prefer to refer to themselves as, but a bit of a distinction between other ratings agencies or ratings groups. CCQI is not assessing individual projects. Instead, we're providing these scores as an indication of confidence that these quality objectives will or won't be met for a specific carbon credit type, which is defined by relevant characteristics, including the carbon crediting program, the specific quantification methodology applied, the host country context, things of that nature. And with this information, and this information is producible through our online scoring tool, one can understand the nuances and granularity of quality aspects that feed into the overall integrity of a carbon credit. I think our original thinking was that this would be a tool that would mostly be used by buyers of carbon credits, who just through speaking with a lot of them have concerns about not really understanding what to buy and are worried about reputational issues or investing in something that doesn't generate the kind of impact that they are expecting. But I think what we found through these assessments is that and since we don't necessarily look at individual projects, but rather the rule sets that are available in the market, is that the information that we're producing is very useful for understanding specific ways to improve methodologies and standards in the market to raise the overall quality floor. And so generally speaking, there are kind of like 2 categories of areas where uncertainty persists in the market. One is where there's a lot of kind of like discretion and subjectivity afforded to project developers and how they apply a methodology. And the other is a very simple thing to fix, which is that the scientific data or literature available at the time the methodology was written has evolved. And it could be as simple as updating a single parameter that is perhaps resulting in overestimation of emission reductions by several orders of magnitude. And so what we would like to see is CCQI used as a tool, as a resource for raising the quality floor and helping folks in the space who I think all share a common interest in ensuring quality in reaching those standards.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think we can all agree that there's a common interest in ensuring quality of credits. Quick note, there are quite a few seats up front for all of you standing. If you did want to come up, we don't bite. If you're not front row kind of people, I also understand. Just wanted to put that out there. All right, we're going to now hear from our third panelist, Guy Turner. Guy is the founder and CEO of Trove Research, who collects excellent data on the voluntary carbon market. Guy.
Thanks, Amy. I feel I'm sort of buttressed by 2 aficionados of quality. Trove Research, we provide a lot of data and analytics on the carbon credit market, the global carbon credit market. We cover policy, we analyze the corporate climate commitments for about 10,000 firms, and we look at all the projects around the world. That's a bit close. We track prices of all the transactions, and we try and put it together in a way that helps. And I've been doing carbon market analysis and research for in the last. I think I started in the last millennium, actually, technically, doing this. And so I've seen the evolution of carbon credit markets cap and trade markets, and then the first sort of major sort of baseline and credit market was the Clean Development Mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol. That sort of lasted. It had a heyday really from 2008 to 2012. It was 100, if not 1,000 times bigger than the voluntary carbon market today. And things went off the boil a bit from 2012 onwards. You could lay the blame at the foot of the Kyoto Protocol or the inability of governments, the US, and et cetera, from supporting that scheme, the international top-down architecture of climate targets. But I think one of the other problems was the inherent challenges that exist in baseline and credit systems for creating carbon reductions, carbon credits, and quantifying them. Europe, under the European Emissions Trading Scheme, between 2008 and 2012, allowed the importation of carbon credits to be used for compliance without, the only mechanism they had was the UN CDM board and the CDM executive board to be the guardians of quality. The European Union over that 5-year period imported 1.6 billion tons of CO2 credits. That accounted for about 11% of the allocated cap over that period of time. That was a very large amount of transfer of credits. The result of that was it inflated the number of credits in the system, prices fell quite considerably, and they didn't really recover because there was banking over, there was no limitation on banking. Those credits survived in the system for many years. With an oversupply, prices crashed, and really very little incentives to abate emissions within the system from 2012 up to 2020. And it was only when the European Union started to sort of tighten up the system and sort of with the Market Stability Reserve sort of restrict supply that prices have been elevated way in excess of anyone's expectations to now $100 a ton, which is fantastic. But one of the concerns was, that wouldn't actually be a problem if we could be guaranteed that a ton of a CO2 from a credit system out in the CDM was the same as a ton of CO2 in the EU ETS. If there was 100% equivalence, then it really wouldn't matter. But the concerns were one around integrity and equivalence of the credits that were being created and used in the system in a compliant scheme. There was no corresponding adjustment at that time on the supply of carbon credits being used in a compliant scheme, and that sort of like opened, I think, started the debate on the quality of carbon credits. The European Union has not opened the door again for any use of credits within the EU ETS. And now I think we're starting to sort of live that journey again in terms of really understanding what, does the ton of CO2 that sits on the certification sort of sheet in the registry from a carbon credit do exactly what it says it did. And it is a 1 a ton equivalent and has that integrity associated with it. It didn't really matter. In the voluntary market, it never really mattered. If you sort of trace back to where we are today, to where we've come from, I don't think anyone ever involved in voluntary carbon markets ever anticipated that the carbon credits created from those projects under the standards and processes that were around 10, 15 years ago, would ever be used for this purpose. The implication from that all of these great initiatives, CCQI, ICVCM, SBTI, and all the other alphabet and acronyms that have existed, net zero has started to make the carbon credit process a quasi-compliance obligation. It was never intended for that. If you actually look back, the original sort of was corporate philanthropy. It started with corporate philanthropy, if not government philanthropy, saying, let's put some money aside for some really great stuff in developing countries maybe, or outside our jurisdiction, and we will really, want that money to be used for good stuff. Then, over I suppose in the 90s or the noughties, there was this sort of emergence of, let's measure the benefit that that's having. Results-based payment. If you look at any donor, USAID, any other sort of developed country aid program, they're now sort of falling over themselves with performance metrics. What's the use of proceeds on the ground? You can hardly get a project done now for paperwork. And I'm not talking carbon credits, I'm talking health, education, all that kind of stuff. So it became a sort of like a results-based process. And carbon if those projects wanted to become, were for climate benefit, why not use a common unit? And a carbon credit, a ton of carbon reduced, became a very useful mechanism, a very useful metric to be able to say, yeah, let's put money into that project rather than that project, because it's on paper it does a better job than that project. So it became a sort of a mechanism. Now that carbon credit, that carbon unit, is now being used by corporates to say, well, let's use that against, or as well as our mitigation plan and offset, and make a claim against it. And virtually in the early days, if someone made it as a carbon neutral claim against a product or a company, no one really, it wasn't that closely scrutinized. Now we're under a very different regime. We've got a spotlight glaring on the sector. Companies are making, BP included, take their obligations very seriously. They take those commitments very seriously. If they've made those statements, they want to be sure that they're going to be using any bought-in units in the correct way, and so we're in a situation now where there's been a rush of attention on quality and integrity, and I think it is time that we tightened up the system, and there's a lot of great work being done. My concern, first of all, 2 points. First of all, I think that there is a difference between regulating the market. Should the market be regulated, or should there be standards? And Personally, I don't think the market needs to be regulated in the same way that other markets do, but I do think there need to be standards. And the second thing is, if we do tighten up the system, and by the way, for full disclosure, we've been working on this problem for the last year and a half, and we will be very shortly launching, based on CCQI, actually. We've worked very closely with CCQI, a system that will allow buyers to assess the integrity of the credits they buy for themselves. But if we go on this journey from where we were to where everyone aspires to be, I think we need to give a lot of thought to the journey, the transition between, if everyone says, oh yes, we never knew it was perfect, and that's okay, but we do, we'll learn by doing, and we'll get there through these great initiatives, VCMI and ICVCM, etc. We need to make sure that the corporates who've been buying the carbon credits, both historically and today, are taken on that journey with us, and are not left trying to nurse a reputational fallout from some change in the way we do things, and them left looking at, hold on a minute, I thought I bought something 3 years ago in good faith, and now you're telling me that what I did was wrong. We need to make sure that the reaction to that from the corporates is not, well, I don't want to touch this stuff ever again because it's toxic. We need to make sure that that confidence is maintained. I don't know exactly how we do that, but I think it's really important we acknowledge it and make sure that they're bought into the process as well.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Guy, for taking us on that journey of the history of the market. That's really valuable, especially as this market's growing with a number of participants. I think one thing you touched on there was some of the inherent risks of these systems and the risk associated with getting it wrong. And so I'm going to start with a question for John. What do you see as the biggest risk that the VCM is currently facing?
I think there's a number of risks, although some maybe more significant than others. I mean, I think there are risks in terms of how companies are claiming carbon credits or otherwise integrating them into their emission reduction pathways. I think there are risks with respect to transparency in the market, including like retailers and exchanges, and how that market is functioning and supporting these projects. But I would say overwhelmingly, questions about the quality of these carbon credits are the most significant risk to the market. I mean, there's a number of outfits that project the potential, the voluntary carbon market as expanding in orders of magnitude and billions of dollars. There's no way that's going to happen if quality is a persistent issue in the market. I mean, you need to have buyers, and buyers are not going to invest in these tools if they don't have confidence that they are representing real emissions reductions, or if they have other concerns about whether it's permanence or something scarier like human rights or something of that nature. So we've already seen how this is kind of forming maybe cracks in the market. I mean, there's at least one prominent airline CEO who has gone out on record and said that basically they don't have confidence in the integrity of these units, and so they're not going to include them in their airlines' decarbonization plans. And I think that would be really, really unfortunate if we don't, as a sector, rise to that challenge, provide assurance to these market stakeholders, and continue to allow carbon credits to serve as a tool to direct much-needed capital, private sector capital, to these projects that are producing amazing benefits. And so I think this is a very not easily, but it's a very fixable issue. We can identify where quality is lacking, and CCQI's assessments have borne that out, where we can point to specific rules and parameters and practices that generate uncertainty or risk in the confidence that these units are accurately representing what the underlying benefits. And I think it requires a responsiveness from those in that position to be able to accommodate that feedback and make those changes in order to protect this market and protect everyone's interests. The number one interest being those project developers on the ground and the people that they affect, to say nothing about the global atmosphere that we all enjoy. And so I think we'll see what happens. I think that the space can rise to the occasion, and we have the resources available to tackle that challenge.
Yeah, thank you for that, John. Quality, assurance, trust, transparency. I'm going to have another question for you on transparency, but I am going to save that one for later. I'm going to go to our other two panelists now with a question on, while we recognize it is a voluntary market, to what extent should it be regulated? And Jeff, I'd like to hear from you first on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And actually, if I could just also build off of John's point, I think he articulated that really well, and I think everybody in the room, would agree that we need to do better at quality and to do better at standardizing what quality means in our market, and also to do better at how we communicate that. And I think we've heard that over the last couple days. I think as an industry, we need to do better at getting together and working together around communicating what it is we're all actually doing in order to attract that finance. But the other thing I would just, to build off of John's point, I'm worried about the pipeline. Personally, I'm worried that we're really focused on designing what quality means at a high level with the various initiatives that have unfolded, and I think it makes it really hard for project developers to do their work and to keep up with what these new initiatives are doing and the new thresholds that are being set. It's never been harder to get a project off the ground, and I'm really concerned that we're going to make it harder and harder for project developers to do good projects. And I know they all want to do good projects. So this is something I'm really personally concerned about is that future pipeline. And I think once we've sorted out quality, which I think we'll continue to talk about for some time, we can't neglect the pipeline that we so desperately need, particularly in the nature-based space. But to your question, and thank you for allowing me to answer that other one, I mean, to your question around regulation, I mean, I think Guy and I are sort of saying the same thing. I think we need standardization in our market. That standardization probably ought to be set by a public body, and depending on the jurisdiction, it's going to be easier than others. So we've got a great program here in California. We're all really proud of the work that our leadership in California has done. And, California, the state government has gotten behind offsets. They've created a standard, but we don't have that at a federal level in the United States. We don't have that at a pan-European level in Europe. We have a program in Australia with Climate Active, and that's public sector standardization of a carbon offset protocol. But even in that program, there have been some very serious issues. So I think even if we do get some form of regulation when it comes to the environmental performance and the underlying quality of our market, we're not going to just be able to stop there. I think as an industry, we all have to step up to help the regulator regulate. And so there needs to be more effort in terms of being transparent about what we're all doing in the market. And we already heard this morning, Kelly Kazare, she did a great job. It said this is one of the best markets there is when it comes to transparency. But I think we all say different things when we talk about transparency, just like we all say different things when we talk about quality. So I think there does need to be more standardization when it comes to offset quality. There needs to be better standardization when it comes to offset transparency. And there also needs to be more standardization when it comes to the underlying performance of our market and the integrity of how our market is performing. So to me, that all points to multiple forms of standardization and multiple potential forms of different regulators in different jurisdictions, doing a good job to make sure this market grows. So I'll stop there. I don't have the blueprint for that. It's certainly not my role to do that, but I think we all, in some ways we may disagree with how that may unfold, but I think we all would agree that better standardization would lead to better performance of our market, which ultimately would lead to better outcomes for the planet.
Couldn't agree more, and I would argue it's everyone in this room's role to figure that out and work together on that pathway. So thank you for those comments, Jeff. Same question to you, Guy. Recognizing it's a voluntary market, to what extent should it be regulated? And I'm curious how you're defining regulations versus standardizations per your opening comments.
Right.
And could you speak into the mic?
Sorry. I don't think the voluntary carbon market needs to be regulated, because my understanding of regulation is that requires an organization to enforce regulations, set and enforce. And there also needs to be fines and sanctions against non-compliance. That's quite a heavy burden of administration to apply. I do think there need to be standards and guidelines. And one of the reasons by drawing that distinction is I think there are enough eyes and ears on what's going on now to call out deviations from the guidelines. And I'll just give one example. I do think there needs to be regulation on the, and it's already happening today, on the use of credits and the claims that companies are putting to credits and general ESG claims. There are I won't give the names of the companies, but there are identifiable examples in Australia, the US, and in Europe where financial institutions have been fined for making bogus ESG claims or climate-related claims. So fund managers claiming that they were screening, one investment manager was fined $2 million, small fine, for claiming that they had screened that they were running an ESG fund, and they weren't. So that was actually mis-selling a financial product. In Europe, I think it might be in Holland, and somebody else can help me out with this, that there have been cases brought against firms making claims on the climate that they cannot substantiate. So I think that is certainly an area where regulation can play a part. But on the supply side, I think there's enough scrutiny now being applied that the industry can, with the supportive standards, can do it. I'll give one example. We track all of the fuel shipments around the world that make climate-related claims, so carbon-neutral claims. And we go through each one of them and we look at what they're claiming, where they're using carbon credits, and we track it all. About 1/5 of the fuel shipments for LNG and oil that have made carbon-neutral claims have offset Scope 1 and 2 emissions, but not Scope 3, which means they're saying that this fuel shipment is carbon-neutral, and we've offset the upstream emissions and the fuel used to ship the oil or the LNG cargo, but not the carbon in the fuel itself. Now, does that sound legitimate? To me, it doesn't. Should that be fined? Should they be fined as a result of that? I don't think so. I think that they should at that point be pointed out and the fingers wagged. And the guidelines, if CCQI and ICVCM, and when we talk to corporates, and this has been the same for 2 or 3 years, ever since this sort of growth in voluntary corporate climate action. The clarion call from the corporates is just tell us what to do, keep it simple, give us the guide rails, and we will then decide on how to manage that. And I think when we get that clarity, there will be far less sort of deviations from the norms, because there would just be less space to operate in.
Makes a lot of sense. I am looking, we have 20 minutes, so I'm just curious, how many questions are there from the audience? A couple. Okay, so 2, 3, 4. Okay, got it. I'm going to ask a couple more questions here, and then we will get to you. So, John, going back to you on that question around transparency, because I think that ties in so importantly to all of this discussion around quality and building trust. You can't trust what you can't see. So what does transparency mean to you? Where do you want to see more of it? And how can we as the market really make that happen?
So I think transparency means that the rules and the methods and the practices deployed both on the carbon credit supply side as well as the demand side are available for learning and for scrutiny and for accountability. I think transparency is something that every stage in a carbon market's journey should strive for. I would say, generally speaking, the carbon crediting standards have handled this extremely well. They're very well set up in their governance structures to support transparency to the extent of making their processes and procedures known, as well as facilitating things like grievance mechanisms for project developers and local communities. I think generally speaking, that's something that the standards are probably kind of leading the pack in terms of all the stakeholders in this space. I think the exchanges and retailers I think could improve significantly. Generally speaking, it's pretty difficult to find examples of exchanges and retailers who will publicly disclose their fees or commissions. And I think that's, it worries me that we don't know what we don't know in that particular area. And there are retailers that do this, to be clear. But it's not a common practice in my personal experience. And this is important because there was a panel yesterday, and it was asking about the role of SDGs on price, Sustainable Development Goals, on prices of carbon units. And I think actually the way I think about it is a bit in reverse. What is the impact of price on being able to achieve the SDGs? Are these project developers actually receiving the funding that they need to be able to deploy these projects well? And I would be concerned if a significant amount of revenue is not reaching project owners to deploy effectively because it's caught up in intermediaries. So I think that's an area where transparency has an opportunity to improve the space. And then lastly, on the demand side, I would say, and this is becoming more commonplace, but for companies that are purchasing carbon credits, you need to disclose your emissions, your climate-related risk, and how you're using carbon credits as part of your decarbonization plan. Without that kind of disclosure, it's hard to hold the private sector to some level of accountability, and also learn about what we need to be doing better. So I think that those are some specific examples of where I think transparency has an opportunity to improve different areas of the market, which all in aggregate it improves confidence in the market and makes sure that it persists as a really strong institution that can continue to contribute to climate change and sustainable development issues.
Yeah, I think what you touched on there around holding the private sector to account, it's difficult to do in a voluntary market. So something that we as a group need to think about and how can we improve that. Going to be honest, I don't have a good transition for this one or a good segue. But, Jeff, you touched on something in your intro that I thought was very interesting. So I wanted to dive into that a little bit more and ask you, what role do you think governments should play in regulating the voluntary carbon market? Regulating or standardizing the voluntary carbon market?
Ooh. Well, Guy won't like what I'm going to say since he doesn't think that they should necessarily be in regulating the market. And I don't have any prepared markets, so this is totally off the cuff. And I think, I want to be able to point to a jurisdiction in the world and say they've got it right, and I can't, right? I think we all saw what happened in Australia with Climate Active, and that was very troubling. And for a while, I think Australia would have been the jurisdiction that I would have pointed to, but considering what happened in recent months there, I think we can no longer point to that jurisdiction. So I think we're probably going to be living in a voluntary carbon market for some time, where different governments are going to be taking different approaches if they are going to regulate. I see Pedro's in the very front row, and his government, the government of Portugal, recently announced some type of voluntary carbon market framework, and I think that's one of the first countries in Europe to do that. As Guy was explaining the history, in Europe we didn't have a voluntary carbon market because we had the CDM, so I think different countries in Europe are going to take different approaches. I live in the UK, and in the UK, we had a review recently from an MP. It's called the Skidmore Review. And I want to call him a minister, but he's not. But Chris Skidmore, the MP, he created over 150 different recommendations about how the UK could benefit from net zero. What are the opportunities? And one of those recommendations, actually one of the most detailed chapters in his review, was around how the UK could set up its own voluntary carbon market and set that up with UK government-backed support. And now we saw last week Scottish Widows, one of our largest pension providers in the UK, is now supporting that and is saying, UK government, please help get in the business of regulating the voluntary carbon market, so me as a pension provider, I have the confidence to invest in the market. So I don't think that there's going to be one single framework for how this is done. I think it's going to be let a million flowers bloom, and that's the world we're going to live in for a while. And so we'll see what happens in Europe. We'll see the evolution of this space in North America. But I would say at this point in time, anything that would help cool the waters and help make it so that companies feel like they have more confidence to invest in this market, I think would be welcome right now. So anything that a government could do to regulate in terms of making the space more investable would be really welcome. And I think that's the key message that I would want a regulator to hear from our industry.
Very well said. And that interaction between the voluntary carbon market and compliance markets, it's a hot topic, and it's one that IETA is prioritizing in 2023. We're looking at that quite seriously. Guy, I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on that in response to Jeff.
Yeah, no, I'm in violent agreement with Jeff on those high points.
Really? We usually aren't, Guy.
But I do think there's one very important thing that governments can do to support the VCM. And deal with the quality issue at the same time, and that is pull their respective fingers out and get their NDCs sorted so that they fully understand the role that individual project activity plays in meeting their NDCs. When they do that, they're in a far better position to underwrite corresponding adjustments for the transfer of credits. And until they can do that, there will, the simplest way of guaranteeing credit quality is have it underwritten by a government through a corresponding adjustment. It's fully underwritten. At that point, the government takes 100% liability for the impact that credit is having, because it pushes it further away from its NDC. And they're not prepared to do that right now because they don't fully understand how the heck they're going to comply with their NDCs and what the individual contribution of individual projects is going to be. But when they get that, they'll be able to say to an individual project developer, yeah, we know exactly where that project sits in our pathway, our mitigation pathway to hit our NDC. And by the way, if you want to export that for any kind of external use and have it underwritten by us, we're going to charge you, we're going to pose a tax, right? Which then compensates the government for then providing additional mitigation activity to put themselves back closer to their NDC target again. And so they can very easily, they're going to have to do that for Article 6.2 and Article 6.4 anyway. CORSIA is going to require that after 2027. Any importing of carbon credits into any compliance scheme globally is going to have to require that. So it's going to have to happen. And if they did it sooner rather than later, that could provide oil to the wheels of the machinery and deal with the credit issue, quality issue, sort of from an insurance policy point of view.
Absolutely, and I think that component of education, especially with governments, but with other stakeholders, is going to resonate with a lot of folks in the room, because we need to get more people on board so that this market as a whole isn't being attacked because they understand how it works. So really great points. Thanks for bringing that up. We are going to go to questions. Your hand went up first, sir, so if you still have a question.
I do. So we talked about the need for standards, but we didn't talk about kind of what those standards might look like, what they might change. So far, what we've seen from the ICVCM, it smelled a little bit Sarbanes-Oxley in that it was about documenting and recording and kind of that burden side of compliance, so rather than saying you can't lie about the baseline until you're going to have to use spatial data. It didn't seem to be moving up that much higher. So do you see that as a reasonable pushback on that? It seems to favour the large companies who can meet those kind of hurdles rather than actually making a tangible change to the quality. So is documentation quality, or are we actually going to tighten up things like baselines?
Do you want to take a couple questions, or do you want me to take a stab at that now?
Why don't you take a stab at that one now?
I mean, hold your breath and see what's published next week, I would say, is the first message, because a lot of hard work has gone into the first version of these core carbon principles and assessment framework. I mean, the consultation that the ICVCM held last fall received over 500 individual responses, 5,000 comments. Pedro didn't have a life for 6 months. So I think hold your breath and let's see what's published next week. I would slightly disagree with that. This is a documentation exercise. I think the purpose of the ICVCM right now is to create a single benchmark that all the offset programs should adhere to when it comes to additionality and permanence and setting baselines and all the things that offset programs work so diligently and so hard to do. I think it's really meant to be a lift all boats approach rather than a fragmentation in terms of having different offset programs go in different directions. So I think that's the intent. We'll probably go through a period where the kinks will need to be ironed out, but I hope that we can get to a point in the near future, this year even, where we will have the first CCP-aligned methodologies, and therefore we'll have the first CCP-aligned labels in the market. That's really the goal. And then I think we're going to be in a market where all projects and methodologies are going to try and be improved over time. And I think that's a really hard task for the ICVCM to do. They're walking a really fine line with trying to lead the market, but not lead the market too quickly. At the same time, being rooted in integrity and being rooted in making sure that this isn't just an initiative that's meant to serve big companies. We've taken the involvement of indigenous peoples and communities very seriously, and we've mandated that they have a role on the governing board, and there's several seats, assigned just to indigenous communities. So I think there's a lot of hard work that's gone into it. I don't want to defend the ICVCM because I think it's too early to do that, and I think we are all going to be tasked with supporting its work, and I hope that there'll be more consultations and opportunities for everyone to input into that work. But let's see, and take a moment to go through the 300 plus pages that will be published next week, and then we'll have that chat.
We're holding our breath. We can't wait. Thank you for the question. Yes, right there. And can you please start with your name and your affiliation? Did you bring your crystal ball?
We forecast many things, but that's not one of them. I honestly don't know until I've seen it. It depends how exacting it is, how achievable it is. It could be so great and so high standard that only 1% of the market can achieve it. In which case, it won't achieve that. It's going to be a must-have because 99% of the credits won't be able to traded credits won't be able to have that, and it can't cover 99% of the market. It's got to be somewhere in the middle. So. Jeff and Pedro and other people who've been working diligently on this for the last 6 months have been, admirably tight-lipped throughout the last 2 days in terms of what to expect. So, yeah, it's a good question.
Could I help you?
Yeah, please do. Bail me out.
I mean, I think that what you'll probably see later this year is an effort from the ICVCM to understand how the market can evolve and take on the work of the ICVCM. So I think, from my role on the governing board, we're trying to get this version, of the CCPs out next week and get the assessment framework out and get everybody, familiar with it. And then I think what you'll see later this year is a process where we're going to try and answer that question and really identify, what will be the uptick in the market for CCP labels? What would the demand look like? I don't think we know what that would be right now. I always thought all along when I first started getting involved with the ICVCM that we might end up in a world where, and this is a UK thing, so apologies, but we live in a world where there's a kite mark, right? And a supplier might say in the future, like a CROA standard really, I'm retailing CCP credits. I know how to make sure my credits adhere to the CCPs, so if you want to buy it, a CCP credit from me, here's what I've got. And then I think on the other side of that kite mark, and I'm making that up, this is not an official ICVCM thing, you might have a buyer which says, I'm only going to buy CCP credits, or I'm committed to buying a certain percentage of credits that are CCP over time. And I don't think it's going to be a situation where we flip a switch and suddenly buyers are only going to be buying CCP credits one day. I think it's going to be an evolutionary process. And that piece around market formation and how the ICVCM engages with the market, please stay tuned for that, because we're really adamant that we get it right and that we work with the market to make sure that this is a success.
Can I?
No, sorry. We have time for one more question, and this lady has patiently been having her hand up, so yes. Interesting question. We don't have any representatives from the standards up here, but did any? Yeah, John.
Maybe some brief thoughts. I mean, I think generally speaking, the standards themselves within their own programs have made an effort to consolidate similar methodologies into single methodologies. I think that's in part designed to align rules and expectations for similar project types and create some consistency there. There is a benefit, though, to having some, I guess, uniquely tailored standards. One example would be like methodologies that are specific to a geographic context that might be designed to ensure higher quality in that respect. But I think, I can't speak for the standards themselves, but I would assume and hope that, with initiatives like CCQI and ICVCM, that we kind of coalesce around this understanding about what's expected of methodologies. I don't think that means a huge shift in how we approach things at all, by no means. I think it's more kind of tweaking the infrastructure that we have in positive ways. But yeah, I think generally the standards have been consolidating where it makes sense to do so.
Yeah, really great answer. So we are at the end of our time, so I want to wrap up and sort of summarize some of the thoughts that we've heard here today. And I want to start with Jeff's comments around the need to increase the pipeline of credits if we want to reach the Paris Agreement goals. So we need to do that with transparency, integrity, quality standards, and trust, so that buyers and governments can trust what credits that they're getting. So it might not look necessarily like regulation, but more standards could be a good thing, and really, all market participants have a role to play. So please join me in thanking this powerhouse panel, all their experience and their answers.
Thank you.
And a big thank you to all of you for sticking it out till the end of the conference. Safe travels home.